Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weekly Dharma Gathering. My name is Sequoia Hayes, and I use she and her pronouns. Tonight's talk is entitled Black Women's Yoga History, Memoirs of Inner Peace, with Aishah Shahidah Simmons interviewing Dr. Stephanie Evans. Tonight's session will be recorded, so if you prefer not to be seen, please take off your camera feature. Please note that you will also be recorded when asking questions. Also, if you have a question during the talk, please feel free to enter it into the chat box at any time, and we'll be able to address it during the discussion period. The recording of tonight's gathering can be accessed within 48 hours via your purchased products on your Vimeo Weekly Dharma Gathering account, and you will receive an email notification once it's posted. I want to hop into the bio here. So Aishah Shahidah Simmons is a Buddhist who has practiced Vipassana meditation for 20 years, 17 of which were previously in the S.N. Goenka tradition. In fall 2021, Aishah co-created and taught with Dr. Rima Vesley Flood the 6-week online course, Buddhism and Black Feminism, at the Barr Center for Buddhist Studies. Aishah is also a survivor of sexual violence and an award-winning Black feminist lesbian cultural worker who produces cultural work in documentary filmmaking, writing, and public speaking. She is the editor of the 2020 Lambda Literary Award-winning anthology, Love with Accountability, Digging Up the Roots of Child Sexual Abuse, and the producer director of the 2006 release groundbreaking Ford Foundation funded film, No, the Rape documentary. She is the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, most recently the inaugural 2022-2023 Changemakers Authors Cohort and the 2020 Sorors Media Fellowship. She is on Instagram and Twitter as AfroLiz. Thank you.
Thank you, Sequoia. And thank you, Weekly Dharma Gathering, for hosting this conversation. And I feel like I've been waiting a long time to have with my dear sister friend, comrade, healer, Dr. Stephanie Y. Evans. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Evans and then lead us in a guided meditation. And then from the meditation, we will go into her presentation and then the conversational interview. So Dr. Stephanie Evans is a professor of Black Women's Studies in the Institute for Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Georgia State University. She served as department chair for 12 years at Georgia State University, Clark Atlanta University, and University of Florida. Her research interests in Black women's historical wellness, her research interest is Black women's historical wellness, intellectual history, memoirs, and mental health. She is the author of 3 books, Black Women's Yoga History, Memoirs of Inner Peace, Black Passports, Travel Memoirs as a Tool for Youth Empowerment, and Black Women in the Ivory Tower, 1850 to 1954, in Intellectual History, as well as lead co-editor of 4 books, including Black Women in Public Health, Strategies to Name, Locate, and Change Systems of Power, and Black Women's Mental Health, Balancing Strength and Vulnerability. At Georgia State University, Professor Evans is affiliate faculty in the Department of African American Studies, the Center for the Study of Stress, Trauma, and Resilience, as well as in the Center for Studies of Africa and its Diaspora. In her writing, and teaching. She highlights life writing and Black women's traditions of self-care, communal care, structural care, and social justice as models for sustainable, as models of sustainable model for human rights. Her full profile is online at professorevans.net. So just really happy to be in conversation with you, Stephanie, Dr. Evans. And so I just want to invite all of us in the live room and in the recorded room to just take some moments for awareness of our breath. I invite you to close your eyes or lower your gaze if you don't feel comfortable closing your eyes and taking a moment to arrive. The Dharma teacher, Philip Moffitt, talks about arriving. That so often our bodies are present, but not our minds. So let's take a moment to arrive, to connect with our bodies. And if breath is a comfortable anchor, our breath. And I want to start with a poem from the Sufi Muslim poet Rumi titled Only Breath. Not Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. I am not from the East or the West, not out of the ocean or up from the ground, not natural or ethereal, not composed of elements at all. I do not exist, am not an entity in this world or in the next, did not descend from Adam and Eve or any origin story. My place is placeless, a trace of the traceless, neither body or soul. I belong to the beloved, have seen the two worlds as one, and that one called to and know, first, last, outer, inner, only that breath, breathing human being. So I invite you to sit in or lay or stand in a position where you are both alert and relaxed. In connecting with your breath, you may feel the breath on your upper lip coming out of your nostrils and in your nostrils. You may also be aware of your breath coming in and out from your chest and stomach. And if you'd like to, you can place your palm on your stomach or your palm on your chest just to feel the inhalation and the exhalation. Relaxing your shoulders, pointing your chin towards your throat to release the back of your neck. Relax your jaw, your mouth, and your eyes. Focusing on the breath. As thoughts arise, allow them to pass like clouds in the sky or waves in the ocean. Don't be frustrated with them. Just welcome them and let them pass. Allow yourself to be held by earth, gravity, your sit bones on the chair or on the floor. You are held. If your mind has wandered off, just gently bring it back, lovingly, kindly. Don't get frustrated. It's just bringing it back. It's a moment of awareness when you recognize that you have gone to another place with your thoughts. Our breath and our bodies are always in the present moment. Bring the mind to the present moment. Has the mind wandered away? Gently bring it back. Our new ancestor, Zen Buddhist teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, shares that through awareness of our breath, we are aware of the present moment. And this helps our mind stop wandering in confused and never-ending thoughts. Through this teaching, we consider our breath as part of our body. Our breathing is a physical formation. It is the door through which we go home to ourself and reconcile with ourselves. Ashe. Thank you. So I want to bring Dr. Stephanie on, and she's going to begin with a PowerPoint presentation. It won't be long, but it will ground us in the conversation about her powerful love offering, Black women's yoga history, memoirs of inner peace. Such a gift, such a gift. And so I will let you begin from there, and then I have my questions, and we'll have conversation.
Excellent. First, thank you so much to the Dharma Talks team for this invite. Thank you to those who have made their way here this evening, and for those who will view the recording later. Thank you most of all to Aishah, Shahidah, Simmons. I have been waiting to speak with you in a manner such as this, so that I can first thank you for your work. You are out here saving lives with your documentary and your writing, so deeply personal, so deeply relevant. And so I just wanted to share 3 very quick slides to ground us in this discussion as kind of an insight to the outline of the book. So there's a lot of resources that I've put online, including a link to a YouTube page with my favorite free online yoga classes for those who are new to yoga or who would like to experience other teachers and things like that. So blackwomensyogahistory.net is a resource website with lots of links to readings and lectures and all sorts of interesting information. So my research question for this book really started with Anna Julia Cooper, who was born enslaved and was a teacher in Washington, D.C. for 70 years. She earned her PhD from the Sorbonne in Paris. Just a really incredible educator that I'd been studying for quite some time as a thinker. And she talks about this concept of regeneration, that we look backward for wisdom, look inward for strength, and look forward for hope and faith. And so when trying to figure out how to be a professor as a first generation college student, I looked to Anna Julia Cooper and Mary McLeod Bethune and other educators. But it occurred to me that I had not really considered Anna Julia Cooper as a centenarian. She lived to be 105 and a half. So my question was, how have Black women elders managed stress? And I spoke with Cooper's great grandnephews who talked about Sis Annie, as they called her, going in her room, in her sunroom, every morning to write and as a meditation. So she had a very clear meditative practice that was part of her journey. And so I asked a question about listening to music, exercising or walking, praying, meditation, or yoga. And Anna Julia Cooper has, the concept of regeneration. So this was my look at the past and how Black women's memoirs allow us to learn, right? Memoirs are mentors. And as Maya Angelou says, these are letters to our daughters, right? Letters to our next generation. So that was looking backward. Looking inward, this was a reflection of my 50th birthday, which was also the 50th anniversary of Black Studies, Women's Studies programs around the country. So in addition to my love of animal prints, since my high school prom picture, I designed my own prom dress, see it right there. This really helped me understand my relationship to Africana women, right? The notion of carrying stories with us and reflecting at the same time. So your internal reflections are not in isolation, right? They're connected to the past. And lastly, this is really what made me focus on yoga. This is a picture of, Mrs. Rosa Parks in full bow position. And rightly so, the Parks estate protected these pictures and they were available in the Library of Congress, but not online because a lot of people have done crazy things with Mrs. Parks's legacy. But I found in the memoir of her nieces and nephews indication that, Auntie Rosa would, go to yoga classes with us or answer the door in yoga pants. And I just never heard anything like that. So this image in particular, and along with Jan Willis, who I'm sure this community is very knowledgeable of, Black Baptist and Buddhist, and Tina Turner, really reflect a way forward. Like, how do we know what to do in this particular moment where there is global stress, there's national stress, there's local stress, there's interpersonal stress, but that these were writers and thinkers and practitioners who experienced everyday violence in the way that we are doing now, but they also experienced and gave us a legacy of everyday peace. And so I'll stop sharing there and we can take the conversation anywhere you'd like to take it. But that was kind of the overall framework of the book, of looking backward, inward, and forward as a continuum of connection to Black women and Black women in wellness.
Thank you. So yes, I want to actually go a little further back and then and ask you, because we talked about this earlier, just for those who will, who've asked me, especially in terms of situating yoga in in a diasporic Black context without, in respect to the South Asian culture, like just really wanting to address that as well, because we, as people of color, we understand appropriation, and just wanting to at least kind of situate and place a context of how you came to Black yoga women's history. Black
Yes,
women's yoga history.
yes, thank you. So one of the first things that I did, so there was a, kind of my personal practice in that I was raised as a dancer, and so started taking yoga pretty early on in my graduate career, based on, the experiences that I've had with my body and healing. So I knew it was a very personal thing. But when I saw that picture of Rosa Parks, it helped me ask some questions about Black tradition. So I'll start with her and then kind of move further back, how I learned about the history and learned to encompass that diaspora, without erasure or co-optation. And it really was looking at the historical moment in the 1970s. And so as someone who studies history, I looked in the archives at Howard University, looked at the Ebony magazine. So in the 1960s and the 1970s, there was this national push for yoga in Black communities. So Mrs. Parks wasn't just doing yoga like out of nowhere. There were accounts of yoga classes at Howard University, and connecting yoga to dance, connecting yoga to martial arts, connecting yoga to spirituality, to African dance, as well as ballet, all sorts of different, explorations of mental health and healing. So there was ample evidence of a national interest in yoga in general, because Yoga Journal started in 1975, but definitely in the Black community. So to learn about yoga, as I understood it, I first, consulted BKS Iyengar, Geeta Iyengar. His daughter wrote Yoga, a Gem for Women, to say, how did Indian and South Asian women write about yoga? And reached out to Rupa Singh and Rumya Pucha, who are Indian South Asian women who are scholars of yoga. And so there's this hashtag Cite Black Women, that is, center us in our research and don't erase us. So the first thing that I did was reach out to Indian women scholars and say, okay, how can I understand Indian yoga? And they gave me some perspective of, contemporary historical that moved beyond the, Patanjali and kind of the more well-known, but also to see yoga as a, political movement from their perspective. And so, but then, looking at the history of the encounters of yoga in the United States, in 1893, Swami Vivekananda, and entered the United States with in the International Religion Conference, right? And so that's kind of the timeline of yoga here. But when I started looking at Black women's memoirs, and Black history in general, and I took a class, a certification of Kemetic yoga, and there was this parallel narrative of Black yoga historically, recent history, but also ancient history, that helped me understand yoga as a universal practice in, a Black practice, an African practice, as well as an Indian practice. And so I took a certification in Kemetic yoga from Yasir Ra Hotep, who in the 1970s, along with Hapir Sir, in Chicago, we've got these Egypt, these students of ancient Egypt who are in Egypt, in the temples, and looking at poses, that resemble what we know as plow pose or the wheel pose or the lotus pose, but these are, African Egyptian poses. Then looking to Yoruba spiritual practices and Riro in Liberia and Yoruba in Nigeria, and seeing how African people organically move their bodies, that this is not an importation of Southeast or South Asian yoga or Indian yoga, but a way that an African understanding of how we move our bodies, right? You have South Africa, the Zulu dancers, right, who have ancient practices, generational practices, right, of how we move our body and relate to our body. And then, of course, Makeda, known as Makeda and also known as the Queen of Sheba. There's a reference to a biblical reference, in the she's in the Bible, the Talmud, the Kibra Negast, and it's Makeda and her people. So it wasn't just a royal practice, right? Makeda and her people bow down to greet the rising and setting sun. And I'm like, that's a sun salutation. You're physically and spiritually connecting to the sun, right? Before she went up to test Solomon about his knowledge. But these are African practice. So in North, South, East, and West on the continent, there's an African tradition of what we know to be yoga, which is that meditative practice. Lastly, or second to lastly, I started looking into meditation in narratives. And there's a reference to, there's 3 references to meditation that Harriet Jacobs wrote in her 1861 memoir when she was, she'd escaped slavery or was, planning to escape slavery and spent 7 years in hiding in her grandmother's attic. But one of those 3 references, she talks about walking meditation. And she is, there's 6 miles between where, the plantation that she's working in her grandmother's house. And she says, I'm walking to, I'm meditating on freedom. I'm meditating on a means of escape for my children and myself. And so this is a way, she's talking about, some people say slavery is so bad, they just won't, rest until, we won't be free until we pass. So she said, I want peace and freedom in this lifetime. And so she was meditating on that. So these are the ways that I've located meditation practices and yoga practices throughout African history, African American history, and I'm able to reconcile that. And lastly, I'll say, I ran into a notation where BKS Iyengar was talking about himself as Black, right? If we're talking about India and South Asia and colonization, segregation, he's understanding that I can't go into these particular hotels when I'm going, on my global visits because I am Black. And he understands Blackness in that way. And there are several references to, Black power and Black is beautiful movements from America impacting certain Indian populations as well, right? And so there's kind of a fully round, overlapping, complex set of ways that Africana yoga and meditation interact with, parallel, intersect with, overlap with what we know as yoga.
Thank you. That's wow. Can you just briefly, and this is like, because I feel like I'm bringing the behind the scenes in front of the scenes, just share about your, just very briefly, and I have questions specifically about the book, but around your presentation in Tamil Nadu that you did in.
Oh, Tamil Nadu,
Tamil Nadu, yeah.
So there was a women's college in Tamil Nadu, India, Sri Parasakti, that invited me to give a talk. Ooh, I was like, oh, I hope I don't jack all this up, right? Talking about yoga to an Indian women's college. And it was absolutely amazing. They were very gracious in listening to the presentation and asking incredibly nuanced questions about, religion, culture, nation, how I came to yoga. But there was an immense pride and an understanding that, yoga is for everyone. And so long as you are not appropriating or claiming to be an expert or telling us, trying to tell us what yoga is, there was this beautiful exchange, very graceful, gracious exchange that allowed me to understand not just the kind of spiritualness of yoga universally, but the critical science behind it, right? And that Indian people are thinking scientifically about, about yoga and wanting to engage on that level as well. It was beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. For me, I'm so interested personally in, definitely Black women's stories, Black women's healing, and then also, the cross-cultural. So much is like group of color in juxtaposition to whiteness. And I love the juxtaposition, the Black, South Asian, particularly thinking about the Dalit populations in India and other parts of South Asia. So just thank you for just laying down that foundation in historical context. So for me, what really draws me in to your book, and I have gifted it to many and will continue to gift it. I'm holding it up and it's available in electronic format. It's also now in Audible. So you can get it in all kinds of ways. You can listen to it in your car, you can, take it on your tablet, or, have the actual print copy. It was just the work and the connection that you made around, activism, definitely sexual violence and healing. So often, speaking from my own lived experiences and observations, activism is what is needed, is brought us forward as a people in terms of, fighting against so many structures that are committed to our annihilation. But often it's kind of like, when we talk about meditation or yoga or prayer, it's kind of like seen as kind of like a detraction from the real work. And what I appreciate about this book is that you really illustrate how it enables that the meditation, the yoga, the self-care, that is a form of rigorous activism. It is a form of grounding us and ensuring that we can live. And really thinking about it, particularly in terms of how so many of the featured women in this book are also survivors of sexual and domestic violence.
Yes. So was that was a question?
It's a question statement. But yeah, just wanting to, like, in terms of, were you kind of like, when you were doing your research, were you like, wow, all these folks are survivors? Or was it like, I'm going to research how survivors healed themselves, in terms of, okay.
It was both. And so I started off, I'm really interested in elders. And so to answer that original question about meditation, yoga, prayer, music, and exercise, I looked at centenarians. So those women who lived to be 100. And Anna Julia Cooper, the Delaney sisters, who lived to be 109 and 104. Ida Keeling, who just passed at 106, who was a runner. All of these women. So I looked there first to say, these are like senior elder, practices as well. But to look at the original, like the core of 6 elders that are the 3 yoga practitioners and the 3 meditation practitioners, I chose those narratives that most prominently featured those practices. And it just so happened conveniently that there was a timeline from enslavement through Jim Crow to the civil rights movement. And that's where, that's where the narratives fell. So then I started looking at their experiences. And Patricia Bell Scott was very helpful here in thinking about how to analyze Black women's narratives. And she says that in viewing a picture of her mother, her mother taught her to tell the truth about her life, right? And these truths are beautiful, ugly, and healing. So I had that framework. Here are the 6 practitioners, beautiful, ugly, and healing. That was my methodology, very kind of wonky and boring, but in that, I noticed that part of what they were surviving was not only the structural violence, but each one of these women had an interaction with sexual violence, domestic violence. So Tina Turner, we know very well. And some of them were recurring survivors, like Eartha Kitt, who talked about being attacked in a cab, in a house, on a train, like just everywhere. Being abandoned by her mother, being molested by the 2 children in the house where her mother left her, just all of these stories. The Delaney sisters, at a train station being accosted. Of course, Harriet Jacobs, and even, Rosa Parks. We talk about her activism on the bus, right? And in Montgomery, but her investigation of sexual violence for the NAACP, and there's a handwritten letter about an experience that she had when she was relatively young, before she got married, and she was working as a nanny for a couple. They had gone out, and a male worker in the house, Sam, a Black man, knocked on the back door and said, "Oh, I forgot my coat." And then let in, when she opened the door, he let in a white man. And the white man proceeded to chase her around the house and say, "It's okay. Sam gave me permission. Like, I can give you money. I can take care of you," trying to get her to have sex with him. Now, she didn't write this, it wasn't even typed up. It was just handwritten. This was in the archive, and Jean Theo Harris does an amazing job of talking about. So we know the Rosa Parks on the bus. We know the Rosa Parks as an activist, but if you look real closely in the fine print in the archives, she experienced this, and she was like, "I'm gonna die because listen, this is just not gonna happen." And she had to, verbally kind of talk him down to not be assaulted. So she knew when she was going to investigate Recy Taylor, she knew what that experience was like. And so as a survivor of sexual violence myself, and I put that in the book because when I thought, this is kind of tangential, I'm talking about yoga, meditation, and healing. Well, healing from what? And I wrote a poem, 6/11, 16, 19, 21, 6/11, 16, 19, 21. Those were the ages that I was attacked. Black men, white men, old, young, neighbors, family. Some I was able to escape, some not. And so, this is why your work means so, so, so much to me. Because as I'm writing about this history and healing, it just became apparent that as healing is our legacy, so is understanding the legacy of sexual violence. So I used that first 6 as a template to understand the second section where your work appears, with Pam Grier, with Deborah Santana, to say this is the criteria for how I will select what healing we are doing now specifically for survivors of sexual violence. And that, Barbara Smith said the purpose of Black Women's Studies is to save Black women's lives. And I really wanted to focus on that internal work, the mental healing work for survivors of sexual violence, because as I end in the book, we talk about those, Black Lives Matter movement and the, incarcerated and, all of these things. We don't talk about those silent murders, like Shahidah Singleton, who was murdered. Like this one, just that, as I was writing the conclusion, this one woman and 3 of her daughters were killed by this man who then killed himself. And so we haven't heard, thousands of Black women missing. Black trans men and women disproportionately impacted by violence. And we, don't, so I'm writing for those who don't necessarily make the front page, those who are walking around, wounded. And so I feel some kind of way, like I am very clear that it's okay for me to do this work. Some days I feel guilty, like I'm not out in the streets, I'm not doing this, that, and the other thing, but I'm like, this 450-page sucker is gonna be here for generations, just like your documentary, just like Love with Accountability. And that is the work, that's my work.
Wow. I first of all, I wanted to say it is really an honor to be included in this book. It really is. I mean, I remember when you reached out to me, I was like, what? To just have my work situated, because as I've shared with you that I had lived like this kind of dual life where there was the hardcore activism over here, and then there was my meditative practice and therapy that kept me going, but never the two shall meet. And this, for me, this book is the woman manifestation of all of it. And what I love particularly from you as a scholar on an academic press, I really, is that you are in the book, because, scholars, you're supposed to like not think about, you're supposed to talk third person, and you start out with yourself. And then, you talk about, you and I have talked about this being your COVID book. So you've got your coda at the end, the last will and testament, but you're in the book. You're telling your story, and you're telling the stories of our foremothers, of our, contemporaries, and then for future generations. It is so profound. And, and it is 400 pages, and I feel like it could be 1,000 pages. But I just want to I want to give props to SUNY Press in terms of like publishing a book like this, because it's not an academic book. It's not like this kind of light, let me just, read this while I'm in the shower. Or you could, but it's really, it's so rich and full, all of the layers. But I really just want to say how much I appreciate how you are in the book, how you name the violence that you experience, how you talk about your own healing journey, that you're not just kind of looking as an outsider in, that you are on the inside looking out.
Thank you. Well, I had shaped the book, and, I know I could have edited it down a little bit, but, as we joked before, I have to speak his name because today is Du Bois's birthday. So, Du Bois wrote Souls of Black Folk in 1903. And then, in his 50s, he was getting ready to have a surgery. And so he's like, I need to write a memoir just in case the surgery don't go well. And then like, that was in his 50s. And in his 70s, he wrote another. And then in his 90s, he was like, no, for real, I'm real good. That was his last autobiography. Well, I felt like everything with the political mess, and as I was closing it, as COVID happened, I was like, we all gonna die. I'm just gonna put it all in there, like, and really used Mary McLeod Bethune and her last will and testament as a model. Like, Dr. Bethune was like, I leave you love, I leave you joy, I leave you the responsibility for the care of Black people. I leave you an understanding of power. Like she had her last will and testament, wrote that sucker out.
And
right
you got it here on page 389.
And I was like,
I leave you books. I leave you a history of Black women's ideas. I leave you social justice education. I leave you mental health and wellness. I leave you memoir. I leave you poetry and music. I leave you joy. I leave you resistance. I leave you inner peace. Peace, y'all. In June 1st, 2020. So we know what was happening June 1st, 2020. So yeah,
like, we gonna die. We all gonna die. And seriously, like we walk around like 3 million people. 3 million people have passed. 3 million people. We act like, okay, I mean, I see you, Putin. I see everybody over here. I see, 45. I don't speak his name. I just call him 45. We know who we talk about. All that. We see all you doing all this stuff. But can we talk about the 3 million souls who are no longer on this planet? And we are talking about emails and, all of these other things as if there is not this big gaping hole in our global society, and it's just, so it's a bit much. This yoga and this writing this book, now I'm writing about wine, it is saving my life. It is, because I'm like, all I have is, I have to be there for my students, and truly I'm in recovery, because that's 12 years as department chair. That's what made me start writing about mental health, because it was like, y'all, I don't want to cuss on here, y'all crazy. I'm in higher education. Like, these people are legit crazy. And I was like, how do I not only maintain my sanity and my integrity, but follow in the footsteps of people like Billy Avery, and the public health activist, and to institutionalize wellness, to cut through the foolishness in higher education and be there fully present for my students, for my colleagues, for my profession, and so this is, like the Mandalorian, this is the way.
For people who don't know who Billie Avery was, she was the founder of the National Black Women's Health Project. So just for, folks who don't know. So I want to open it up for questions. I see Dr. Simmons writing feverishly. But I don't know if you all have, if there are any questions, and good to see you, Linda. And yeah. So are there any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have an expression of gratitude, and particularly for the timeliness of this conversation. And over the past about 7 or 8 years, I kind of gave up on the practices like yoga and meditation that had become part of my, healing and self-care practices. And so there've been so many conversations just over the last few days about kind of reclaiming myself and returning to myself and healing myself and reclaiming my joy and all of those that, unrelated to, well, in the universal scheme, of course, they're all related, but, separate conversations with separate people that, that have emerged. And so just this feels like this is part of that collective conversation about coming back to my joy. And so thank you both.
Well, thank you, Linda. Yeah, so good to see you.
You too. I'm looking forward to being able to put my arms around you again.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes. Wait, you're mute.
Well,
Hi, Mom.
Oh, wow. It's, first of all, so wonderful to be present for this amazing conversation. Aishah has gifted me the book, and I so appreciate it. And believe you me, after this conversation, I'm going to dive into it because I haven't. And it's so amazing just hearing you talk about it. And I had no idea that Dr. Anna Cooper lived to be that old. I didn't know that. I mean, my goodness. And I would love it if you would just tell us a bit more about her life and her practices.
Did you know about her yoga, about Rosa Parks' yoga, Mom? I'm just curious.
I saw something. I did. I'm not sure how I did know that from somebody maybe who
Must
knew
be
her,
Stephanie. Yeah.
but it could have been you, Stephanie. But of course, people who were in Detroit who knew her quite well might have mentioned it. But I had no idea that it was a significant part of her practice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Good to know.
And yeah, and I mean, the fact that Mrs. Parks, you know, and I looked at those pictures, and they're cropped pictures just to focus on her. But if you expand out on the picture, she was actually teaching yoga. And so, you know, usually when I give these presentations, a lot of Black women in particular are like, oh my gosh, so thank you so much. I mean, I did an interview with Yoga Journal, and they said the perception is that only skinny white women do yoga, and that's just not the case. But the Black women are like, thank you so much, because, you know, my aunties clown me. My grandmama says that this is not Christian. I was like, Mrs. Parks was a deaconess in the AME church, you know. And so, but here she was in 1974, she had just turned 60, and she lived to be 92. So she, you know, you see on the off to the side, there's a line of chairs, and you can see this one woman's fro, you know, and some stacks. Like, it's clearly a dated, you know, picture. But for Dr. Cooper, there's a new biography coming out. So be on the lookout for that. It's going to be absolutely incredible. But I went to the archives at Howard University, Moreland Spingarn, before they were digitized, and found pictures of her gardening, references to card parties. You know, you don't think about that. She had a hobby of, you know, like, she built the fireplace. She had a hobby of tile, like creating tiles around the fireplace and stuff. Like, she did all that. But it was her great grandnephew's, Newsom is Dr. Newsom, who goes to Asala all the time, who said, like, she would go in that sunroom every morning, and like, that was her ritual. Everybody knew that's, you know, that's how she was raising 5 children who were not her own in that house on T Street, 201 T Street. You know, and I mean, there was so much going on. Like, she was at 201 T Street. Mary Church Terrell was at 285 T Street. Like, there was a whole bunch of stuff going on in DC. But, you know, Anna Cooper died in her house, in her sleep, in her bed, at 105 and a half. And that is because she had a very clear practice of setting her boundaries, doing her work. And I mean, and I will say, even though I focus on elders, when I first started this work, I was very, you know, I walk tenderly and talk of elders, because while we celebrate those long living, I also think about Fannie Lou Hamer, right? And Mrs. Hamer, the sacrifices that she made with her body for us, right? Audre Lorde, who because of cancer did not get to see, you know, be an elder. So it's an understanding that self-care and quality of life has a lot to do with today, right now. Like, you know, what we're here to talk about today, right now, this moment, this breath, as much as it is to, you know, like, not everybody wants to live to be 105 and a half, right? But if you are going to have some sort of longevity, there's, you know, self-care is not some frivolous, you know, massages and mud baths, right? It is a practice, a radical practice. And the fact that we are being hunted right now in this country and in this world, and always have been as women of color, predominantly Black women. Like, you know, every day I live is a victory. Right? Who was the poet? Let us, you know, come with me to and celebrate today that something has tried to kill me has failed, you know. So it's no small thing, you know. Yeah, it's a journey, that's for sure.
Did you have your hand up, Sheila? Or okay. Anyone else have any questions?
I didn't know I was muted. I was going to say thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you for taking the time to come.
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was recruited heavily, and I'm glad I was, by Aishah Shahidah Simmons.
It's my partner. So, you know, I'm bringing my whole tribe.
She was like, listen, I'm in the next room. So, you know, yes, thank you. Lucille Clifton.
Lucille Clifton.
Won't you celebrate? Won't you celebrate with me that something today has tried to kill me and fail? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, it's so nice to meet you.
Hi. Yeah, pleasure.
Yes. Thank you.
She had something to do. I was like, you gotta be on Zoom at 7. I don't know what else is going on.
Could I mention one more thing? There's somebody that I would love for you to connect with, who happens to be a close friend of mine, which is such a blessing. Her name is Kathy Phelps, and she's a nationally award-winning director of an agency in a victim services agency in Denver, Colorado. And about a decade ago, she decided that her agency should begin offering trauma-sensitive yoga classes. And one of the challenges was that she couldn't find enough women of color to teach those classes. And so she embarked on a couple of things at the same time. One was to begin training members of her staff and of the community to get certification as yoga instructors. And the second was to support a South Asian woman who had been practicing yoga her whole life, who had been training her whole life, but couldn't get certified in the United States because, you know, I don't have to explain, right? And so she supported her to be able to not only get, you know, traditional certification, but also to start her own school, to her own program, begin training folks. And it's just been a phenomenal program over the last decade plus, with a variety of kind of specialized programs. Like there's a yoga class for Muslim women. There's a yoga class for service professionals in high stress professions. There's, you know, just kind of, you name it. If the need comes up for a group of women to come together in community, then they begin a yoga class for that group. So just wanted to share that with you and put you in contact with her if you're interested in pursuing
Well,
that.
please do share the website that's got all of the information. I actually got my yoga certification thinking I would want to teach yoga. I work with a program called Youth Spark here in Atlanta, and it's an anti-sex trafficking program. And I gave 2 classes there. And what I found was that I felt a little too vulnerable teaching yoga. You know, let's not even talk about my calendar, my schedule. You know, it's just like we're just doing too much. But I came to the realization, like, I would rather talk about yoga than teach yoga. I would rather, you know, and I do incorporate meditation into my classes, into my mentoring, but full-blown yoga, the practice of putting my physical body in front of people, I may be able to do at some future time, but I have a great respect for what it means to teach yoga well. And early on, just realized, like, you know what, I ain't good at everything. I'm gonna leave this to the professionals. And I'm just going to talk about the history of yoga, you know, and I'm glad I did get the certification, so I know what I'm talking about as a, you know, practitioner. And to get the certification, you had to teach classes and things. So I know I can do it.
Mhm.
I just know that it's not necessarily for me. And I've just seen I've witnessed some incredible classes. And I'm actually a real introvert. Like, nobody believes me when I say that, but I don't like people that much. You know, so I don't go to public classes. I do pajama yoga. I do yoga in my house in my pajamas.
Yeah.
And that's my speed. Because, and even when I'm taking an online class, I'll hit pause like 50, 11 times. I'll hit, because, you know, it's like, okay, breathe. Okay, move. No, I'm still breathing. Just
Yeah.
put that on pause. Let me just, okay. And I'll breathe for like another 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. And then I'll be like, okay, now you can start. And they're like, okay, and then move this way. And then I'm like, okay, pause. I'm just going to move this way, because if I move too quickly the other way, something's going to pop. And I really do gentle yoga,
Mhm.
gentle, slow, you know, bend over and touch your toes yoga. I saw that picture of Mrs. Parks in the bow pose, and I was like, ma'am, you're 60,
Wow.
ma'am. You are 6. It was a month after she turned 60, and her feet are back up in here. I was like, oh goodness, maybe I'll get there someday.
It really resonates what you said about the vulnerability of teaching. Because
Yeah.
the program that I just talked about, I was part of that first cohort of folks who trained to get certification, and I went into it kicking and screaming. and and part of the commitment of taking the training was then I was obligated to, you know, to teach three classes afterwards, and my classes were for seniors. And same thing, that I felt so vulnerable about the asanas in particular, but the emphasis in my classes was on stretching, but primarily on breathing and meditating. And it turned out that those were exactly the things that the senior ladies were interested in. Yes, it was quite an experience, despite myself being my greatest barrier and critic.
Yeah.
Please
I mean,
let Kathy know about the book, Linda.
Yeah,
Please.
hey, as soon as I saw that, even before it was published, you know, when I saw kind of the first announcement on it on one of the binder sites or somewhere, I immediately sent it to Kathy.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you. Well, are there any final words you'd like to say, Stephanie?
I'm just grateful. I'm grateful. I love you, Dr. Simmons. I love you, Dr. Simmons. I love you. I love you so much. You know, I had the pleasure and the honor of working in the same department at AfroAm, in that battlefield at the University of Florida. Ooh, yes, ma'am.
And you know that it was only because of spiritual practices that I survived that and was able to retire in 2019 alive.
Oh, I'm so glad you got out of there, because but you
too.
know, honestly, anywhere you go, there's just a lot of foolishness if you're in higher education or in healthcare or in nonprofit or in, you know, ...
Anything, yes.
But yeah, it's been a pleasure and an honor to do this work. And I know that I'm doing it in the tradition of you and yours, and to have the pleasure of being in conversation with you, Aishah. Like, when I tell you that your work has been so instrumental in my healing journey, like, it's easy for some people to, you know, you go, oh, thank you so much, I appreciate that, I think, oh, that's nice, and you just kind of shove it. I was like, no. What I'm saying is that whole concept of Ubuntu, that I am because we are, like, my work would not make any sense without your work. There's a whole network of people who I am in direct spiritual connection with, some of whom I've never really met, you know, some of whom I'm close, but it is our work, and it's in community, that our work makes sense. So this has just been a beautiful opportunity, and I'm grateful to have this conversation.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And it really, it means a lot, as you know, from your research and my sharing. It's been a hard journey, but it's been a rewarding journey. And just so grateful to see all the ways in which things are connecting and coming full circle, and feels like Sankofa, a Sankofa moment. So everyone, if you don't have your copy of Black Women's Yoga History, get your copy. Print, ebook, Audible, to just this gift of love that Stephanie has given us, and that you can learn so much about yourself through the experiences of Black women. And I think that we're not often encouraged to do that, to center Black women's stories and histories and lives, to understand how we move in the world. So thank you. Thank you. And if you want more information on Dr. Evans, please go to Professor Evans, EVANS.net, and wealth of resources there. So thank you. And I just want to give a big shout out to Shantae, Dr. Shantae Smalls, and the entire weekly Dharma gathering tonight. Definitely Sequoia Hayes and Sheena Brockington. Like, it's just 3 years of just the recordings, the teachings. I've learned so much. I've been honored to share some, but just want to acknowledging that weekly Dharma gathering is going to be taking a new iteration. So what an honor to bring closure in Black History Month, talking with Dr. Stephanie Evans about her masterpiece, Black Women's Yoga History. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all so much. And I just want to take a moment to go off a script just a little bit, especially after Ms. Linda mentioned Denver. And if the program that you're referring to is Satya, I am a graduate of Satya. I went through yoga teacher training in 2019, and know Kathy Phelps and have worked with her and her organization related to wellness and yoga. And just so many connections here, especially related to Rosa Parks. I'm currently in Anchorage, and there is a art exhibit here about Black lives in Alaska, and there's a photo of Rosa Parks in that exhibit, and I was very curious about her work. And so to hear also, that being brought up, I just wanted to, just say my thanks for the both of you all, and my excitement for being here and talking to you all about the book and your work, and just how much you have continued to influence and be an inspiration for someone like me. So thank you all so much. Yeah. And as we kind of wrap things up, thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's online Dharma gathering. Consider becoming a subscriber if you aren't already, related to just the library, the bank of, weekly Dharma gatherings. And in addition, make sure to follow on Instagram at Weekly Dharma and Facebook at Weekly Dharma Gathering. Thank you all so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Excellent programming.